When the finance minister reads the next financial year's 2020-2021 budget later in June, the war chest available to spend may not be as much amidst the prevailing tough economic times compounded by the COVID-19 outbreak, which has upended the global economy from trade to financial markets. In the statement to Parliament on March 19th, Finance Minister Matia Kasaija indicated that the outbreak would hit the Ugandan economy a gut punch at both micro and macro levels, including sending some 780,000 people into poverty.
Given the current situation, the projection for economic growth in financial 2019-20 has been revised downwards from 6.0% to between 5.2 to 5.7%, depending on the severity of the disease impact eventually on the country. The biggest impact will be on the service sector. Travel restrictions are already affecting the tourism sector, including hotels, accommodation and transportation.
With all economic spheres adversely affected, Kasaija revealed that Uganda Revenue Authority would register shortfalls in the second half of this financial year, ending in June, and in the new financial year, starting this July.
The coronavirus will mainly impact international trade taxes, reduction in value of imports, as well as consumption taxes, VAT, and excise duty due to the slowdown in the industry and service sector. Impact on public investment projects. There is likely to be a slowdown in the rate of execution of government development projects, especially in the transport and the energy sectors, due to the impact on the project financing, as well as the likely impact on the required inputs that are imported.
In total, the minister said, government is staring at a financing gap of 370 billion shillings for this financial year and 350 billion shillings in the next one, which will be plugged by borrowing 715 billion shillings from the World Bank Fund announced in February to help developing countries cope with economic impacts of the outbreak. Earlier on in February, before the outbreak spread nearer home, Uganda Revenue Authority announced a roughly 700 billion shillings shortfall in tax collections against a target of 9.7 trillion shillings during the first half of the financial year between the months of July and December last year. For the second financial year half from January to June, the tax body planned to collect 10.4 trillion shillings, and with 3 months left, officials indicated they are left with 5.5 trillion shillings to meet this target. The total resource envelope for the financial year ending in June is 40 trillion shillings, with 20.4 trillion shillings as revenue collections, of which 18.87 trillion shillings is tax revenues and 1.5 trillion shillings as non-tax revenues. But with the trajectory of low tax collection shortfalls, this means that several key activities listed in the current budget have to be deferred in the next budget. For the next financial year 2020-2021, the Ministry of Finance had presented a preliminary budget of 41.9 trillion shillings, of which government will contribute 33.16 trillion shillings from domestic revenues, which will be supplemented by 8.7 trillion shillings from external funders. With the prevailing circumstances and a looming global economic slowdown that will likely stretch to the end of year, it remains unclear if next financial year's budget will be revised, and if not, where domestic finances will come from. The former URA Commissioner General Doris Akol, who was recently replaced after almost 5 years at the helm of the tax body, revealed in February that tax collection shortfalls were as a result of unrealistic targets set by the Finance Ministry amidst other lingering challenges.
I'm showing that the target of 20, which was communicated, is unrealistic because, one, it was not in the MTV projection. Secondly, it was amended. This was the second amendment. Thirdly, even if you go by the trends, it is 4 trillion over the last financial year, and 1.4 percentage point of GDP. The projected growth in GDP on year is supposed to be 0.5%. The year when we had a growth in GDP over 0.5% was 2014-15, because again of the GDP growth dynamics in that financial year. So that is the context that I'm giving to the revenue performance. It is easy to say URA is not performing, but against what are we not performing?
For example, in this financial year alone, URA expects to lose at least 500 billion shillings in tax exemptions for income tax doled out to select investments last financial year. The awarding of hefty tax exemptions and other incentives at the discretion of the Finance Minister under the Public Finance Management Act has for long been a subject of controversy. The 2019 Auditor General's report submitted to Parliament in January shows that the Finance Ministry owes Uganda Revenue Authority 863 billion shillings from 2005 to June last year, which was granted to 67 companies as tax exemptions for, amongst others, value-added tax, pay-as-you-earn, income tax, and withholding tax. Since committing to settle the taxes, Mwanga reveals that the areas are reflected in URA's revenue statements as collectible, yet government has not shown any commitment to settle the tax obligations. While defending these incentives, finance technocrats claim they are meant to attract foreign direct investment to the country. However, there's no cost-benefit analysis to this effect. A 2019 study by Mackay University's Economic Policy Research Center detailed that, to the contrary, tax incentives are very costly to the economy, estimated at 1% of GDP. The study noted, and I quote, "The need to remain competitive is most often interpreted in the narrow sense of the length of a tax holiday rather than low tax effective rates to encourage investment and attract firm-specific international mobile capital. The same consideration makes it difficult to reform the incentive regime despite the recognition in Uganda that tax holidays and exemptions may come at a significant revenue," I close quotes. Tax is a compulsory levy on the citizen and private sector and one of major sources of incomes for governments. In the last 5 financial years, URA surpassed its targets only once in 2018, when it collected 16.6 trillion shillings against a target of 16.3 trillion shillings. Notwithstanding, the share of tax revenue to the size of the economy has for the most part not grown correspondingly, and in the region, Uganda's tax to GDP ratio, which officials say was nearing 14%, but after rebasing, the economy last year reduced to 11%, but regardless, remains the lowest behind Kenya, Tanzania and Rwanda. The rebasing by Uganda Bureau of Statistics showed the size of Uganda's economy in real times had grown to 128 trillion shillings or $34 billion, up from 115 trillion shillings in 2018 on the account of activities like oil and gas and manufacturing. According to the World Bank, despite this expansion, about 700,000 young people reach the working age every year, yet only 75,000 jobs are created annually, which leaves more than 70% of Ugandans employed in agriculture, mainly on a subsistence basis. Overall, the contribution of the agriculture sector grew from 22 to 24%, which, according to Moses Kagwa, the Director of Economic Affairs in the Finance Ministry, is another impediment to domestic revenue mobilization.
Many problems that do inhibit tax administration. One is the nature of our economy. 51% of our economy is informal. And when you have an informal economy, it's very difficult to tax it because a lot of the transactions cannot be traced. You find that construction is fast growing, but when you look around, to see companies or firms that are paying tax, they are not there. Transport is a big sector, but it doesn't contribute much. Then you look at agriculture, it contributes to 25% of GDP, but its contribution to tax is about 3%.
Kagwa acknowledged that tax incentives are a stumbling block, but said the recently launched domestic revenue mobilization strategy will address some of these challenges.
The exemptions we have already mentioned that, estimated to be about 1 to 1.5% of GDP. So if we are collecting that money, we would have more in the kitty. And they distort, because once some people have the exemptions and the others don't have, then the need or the commitment to pay is actually undermined, because they say, well, this one is paying, this one is not paying, why shouldn't I pay? Some of the local people are saying that the tax systems favors the foreigners.
The 5-year domestic revenue management strategy is a move away from the ad hoc annual tax policy, piecemeal adjustments with little alignment to an overarching strategy which, according to the finance minister, Matia Kasaija, created a high degree of unpredictability and uncertainty in our tax policy direction.
Before, we didn't have that wide approach of looking at things. Every year we would have a consultant, maybe one or two, to come and look at particular aspects of policy and propose measures. And then we'd put measures in place, and another consultant comes the following year and puts something else. So there was no coherence in all the things we are doing.
With a lot of informality in the economy on the account of agriculture and service sectors, it means that the burden of growing domestic revenue collections has to fall disproportionately on a small circle in the legal and formal sector, comprising of a small working class and the few multinationals present in the country. According to a 2018 Fair Tax Monitor study by a coalition of NGOs including Oxfam, Uganda has one of the lowest taxpayer to labor force ratio for income tax of 0.09% compared to Kenya at 37.30% and Tanzania at 5.88%. The study notes, and I quote, "The percentage of the active population registered for taxes is still very low at only 6.8%, though the share has been increasing during the last 5 years, and despite some increment over the past 5 years, the percentage of established and operational business entities registered with URA for taxes is still very low at only 7.1%, I close quotes. The problem of a big informal economy largely reflects government inefficiency, but which Kagwa said they are progressively addressing.
Now we are trying to ensure that at least there's a common identifier, the national ID. We want to use it on all transactions, bank transactions, inland transactions. The new lands transactions now require for you to have a NIN, a national identification number. The getting a passport requires you to do that. Opening an account requires you to do that. Having a water connection requires you to do that. So we can now trace.
One sophistication of Uganda's large informal sector, highly placed sources told NTV, is that it's filled with several high net worth individuals, including sacred cows, who are highly connected to the system and are deliberately avoiding and evading taxes through dubious schemes like blackmail, collusion, or corruption. According to URA, 50% of high net worth individuals are in the wholesale and retail sector, but those with the highest revenue potential appear to be concentrated in financial and insurance services, real estate, professional and technical services. There's no universally accepted definition of a high net worth individual, but closer home, the tax body categorizes those with a net worth of $1 million or 3.7 billion shillings. Between the financial years 2015-2016 and 2016-2017, the tax body managed to collect only 40 billion shillings from the few such individuals as those identified. The main problem, though, URA admits is, I quote, several of the high net worth individuals in the country are policy makers or can influence policy, have political capital, and tax proposals that directly affect them are rejected by policy makers. These, according to the tax body, are also hiding their loot in agriculture, which Dr. Ezra Munyambonera, a senior research fellow at Mackay University's Economic Policy Research Center, said needs to be taxed.
Taxing agriculture has to take considerations of commercial farming and peasant farming. Now, in Uganda, what we are lacking now is a database. If you don't have a database for who are the commercial farmers, who are commercial businesses, then you cannot think about taxing them. So challenges for government to, if you government to tax agriculture, we must have a database of all commercial farmers in the country by sector, by commodity, coffee, bananas, livestock. From there, government can decide, working with the local government, which should be the people to tax.
Munyabonera told NTV that Uganda's tax policy is perforated with a number of gaps and contradictions.
Even the formal sector that are paying taxes, there is high tax avoidance and evasion, being motivated by issues of compliance and all of that, and also being motivated by high tax burdens.
He revealed that taxing agriculture is a plausible idea, but the tax needs to be simplified. He says such efforts have to go hand in hand with strengthening of local governments as the managers of the database and principal collectors of such a tax.
The way to go now, tax must be introduced to commercial agriculture. Those people will be producing, and there must be the liberty to have a database. Every district at sub-county level, at least you must, this 0C system and all of that, can know Mr. X has 100 goats, so that these people are brought on board.
However, the Auditor General's annual reports have detailed how local government officials under-declare the revenues collected, besides a cocktail of other challenges like a bloated administration. A 2017 study by Siatini and Oxfam established that the Department of Finance, which is responsible for local revenue in most district local governments, are not manned by professional revenue officers, but rather professional accountants assigned the duties of this function. As government prepares to deal with the meltdown from the coronavirus pandemic over the coming months, it's probably high time they thought about fixing the ineffective tax system.